Hello, my dapper art sluts. It's Allison Moon, and you are listening to the Artgasm Podcast. On today's episode, I interview fashion designer and social worker Nhakia Outland regarding her project Prevention Meets Fashion, all about integrating sexual information and sex education with fashion. And I found it to be such a wonderful conversation, and I'm thrilled to present it to you today. Before we get to that, though, I just wanted to send one quick thank you to everyone who's been supporting this podcast by sharing, by tweeting, by supporting me on Patreon. My patrons are incredibly supportive and incredibly helpful in me being able to actually move this podcast to a weekly schedule. I've been doing these new quickies every other week where it's just me solo, and that's because of the support of my patrons. So thank you everyone who supports me on Patreon. If you enjoyed those episodes, I've gotten some wonderful feedback from folks, and so I really appreciate those of you who seem to be liking these little one-off quickie episodes that I've been doing. If you'd like to hear more of them, you can hear them at Patreon. It's patreon.com/artgasm. If you become a supporter, you can get access to my full back catalog. If you'd like to become a supporter, it would help so much. And even if you can't, just sharing and spreading the word is always very helpful. So thank you to everyone who's reached out to me, who's shared things, all the things. Another quick item before we get to the interview, I just wanted to share a little bit of news in the art and sex world regarding the passing of a fetish artist named Namio Harukawa. Namio Harukawa, if you are into fetish art, you've probably encountered his stuff at some point. He is known for illustrating these voluptuous, fat, beautiful women, almost always sitting on the faces of very scrawny, very weakling men. And his stuff is aesthetically beautiful and really, I can't say one of a kind because God knows in the fetish world, there's no such thing as somebody who is the only person who's into something. But I just find his artwork to be so beautiful as it depicts some really hardcore stuff. Face sitting is just one of the themes, although it seems to be one of his more popular themes. One of his most famous pictures, I think, is of a beautiful woman smoking a cigarette, dressed to the nines, while sitting on this man's face on a subway. And I just love it. And it's some of the positions for the men's bodies they look broken, they look skeletonous, they look so weak and frail compared to these healthy, hardy, gorgeous women. And personally speaking as a dominant woman, speaking as a voluptuous woman, looking at pictures that are done this way, that are so blissful, that are so joyous in this very strong SM dynamic involving, fat women basically just owning these scrawny men. I just remember seeing these and being like, it just felt, in that kind of goofy way, it felt very empowering. It felt very gratifying. It's just nice to see. It's always nice to see eroticism that represents something that feels affirming, I think, especially when we look at mainstream porn and how a lot of mainstream porn doesn't tend to represent the wide range of human interests and sexuality. I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of us turn to erotic art, because it's not necessarily about turning us on, although oftentimes that is a byproduct. Oftentimes it's just about seeing our interests and our fetishes and our likes and our yearnings represented beautifully. And I think that's just so nice. And I think Namio Harukawa did that beautifully. I strongly recommend looking his stuff up. I would tell you not to look it up at work, but so few of us are actually clocking into an office. So, hey, look it up wherever you want to. There's actually, I think the best place, you can certainly just Google him and you'll find all sorts of things. There was also an Instagram account, Artwork by Namio. That's Namio. Where you can see a lot of these pieces, and they're just great. I think something about the way he uses, I want to say it's pencil, it might be charcoal. I'm sorry that I don't know enough about the style to say, but he creates something really great about the sheen of skin that I think is wonderful. It somehow makes the women look glowing, even though these are all in grayscale, black and white. And the men look sweaty. This is what I love about erotic art too, is that oftentimes it's not just about the turn on, it's about the artistic skill. And there's no doubt that Namio Harukawa had a stunning artistic sense. So rest in peace, Namio Harukawa. My thoughts and condolences to all of the people that loved you who have been left behind. For those of you who are interested in this kind of thing, please do look him up. All right, and now to the main event, my interview with Nhakia Outland. Point of context that I wanted to share in advance is that, like with a lot of the other early episodes in season 2, I recorded this with Nhakia before social distancing became a thing. And yet, in this kind of weird coincidence, beautiful bit of kismet, Nhakia brought up the use of masks, the use of wearing masks as a streetwear trend. And it may have been, in America at least, kind of an isolated thing in certain communities to wear masks, and now it's become ubiquitous. And yet, there are still bodies, there are still people who are allowed to wear masks, more so than others. And we talk a little bit about just the privilege of being able to honor the CDC guidelines based on your access to privilege, and how Black and brown people are still prohibited in some cases, feared in others, regulated in still other ways for exercising their rights to protect themselves and their communities. And I just thought it was such a strange moment that we were talking about this in this very kind of theoretical, casual way. And now, seemingly in a matter of days, it's become this ubiquitous clothing accessory. So I just thought it was an interesting moment of these very clear moments in which fashion and prevention are so real. And I thought this episode was just perfect for this cultural moment that we're living through right now. So, without further ado, allow me to introduce to you Nhakia Outland of Prevention Meets Fashion.
Nhakia, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, I appreciate you letting me have this platform to speak about my business.
Yeah, so let's just launch in. Just tell me about Prevention Meets Fashion and the impetus for it, and really kind of the work that you are trying to do with it.
Yeah, so Prevention Meets Fashion started about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was actually an initiative under my consulting business, Prevention is Key, which is another sexual health business that I go out and I do consulting work, just teaching people how to talk about sex and sexuality. And through that, it was my annual fundraiser actually, where I wanted to engage teens and communities that normally I wouldn't be able to reach because my normal community is LGBTQ focused.
Mhm.
So I started doing the condom fashion shows as a way to engage Black and Brown communities that were and were not LGBTQ.
Mhm.
And from there, the kids really loved it and urged me to have another space for it. So after all of that information, decided to start Prevention Meets Fashion on its own. So since then, I've been structuring the business, creating curriculum, and really talking about how fashion is not frivolous and how fashion can be used as another clinical and community tool. As I am a social worker by trade,
Mhm.
I started noticing that a lot of modalities were art therapy and all these other therapies under the art realm, but fashion was not one. And of
Mhm.
course, we all know in the LGBTQ community, fashion is like all of that. Like it's
It's
you know
really important. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
really important. I know for me when I first came out as queer, I really expressed myself through fashion a lot and was trying to find myself that way. So that's basically what Prevention Meets Fashion is. Our mission is to increase sexual health knowledge through fashion, and I use fashion as a tool to do that. So I still have my condom fashion shows every year. We just had one February 16th, and the theme was sex positive streetwear. So
Mhm.
what we did was we took streetwear brands that was popular within a year or so, and I had some designers, mainly myself, design clothes that was really focused around streetwear, but did it with condoms. So we had like frilly dresses and mermaid type at the top and come out during the bottom. We had hoodies and face mask and um, kimono style robes, and just really talk to people about like what Prevention Meets Fashion is for and what we're doing. And this year, I decided to talk more about consent and teen dating violence because actually
Mhm.
one of our models was actually going to miss the show because she was dealing with intimate partner violence. So it
Oh.
couldn't have came up at a better time to talk about consent and intimate partner violence and how that intertwines with sexual health. And
Mm-hmm.
also condom negotiation, right? Because if you're going
Mm-hmm.
through intimate partner violence, how are you going to negotiate condom use if that's what you want your partner to start using condoms or
Mm-hmm.
reintroducing it into the relationship. Also, I always draw a lot of kids from, I want to say, 6 and up, and so it's also a good way for them to see condoms in a different light, not just a sexual way, like, oh, you're about to have sex, here go a condom. They actually get to touch the material and know that it's latex, which is a material that's used in a lot of different forms.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, our vision is really just to create a safe and affirming space for all gender identities to be able to express themselves authentically through fashion. And I collab a lot with other streetwear brands, other gender non-conforming brands. Most of our proceeds go to several LGBTQ organizations that I work closely with. And yeah, I'm just so excited to see where it goes and start traveling, speaking more about what I'm trying to do with Prevention Meets Fashion.
I'm curious, when you mentioned talking about fashion as integrated into clinical work. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like from a practical, like, social work standpoint? Because I can see it from, like, this an art, an art modality, but it sounds like you've got a lot more, experience integrating it into communities. Can you tell me what that looks like?
Yeah, so what that may looks like is if I'm going to do a talk, it is like the intersectionality of mental health and sexual health. And like I said, how intimate partner violence may come up with fashion, right? So it may, especially with teens, it may start off with, don't wear that shirt, don't wear
Mm-hmm.
that color hair, don't wear that color lipstick. Or in black and brown communities, you may see it as a lot of us grew up with don't wear red lipstick because you're looked at as a hoe. Don't wear, a mini skirt past age 20. So, uh, integrating it into social work that way, because as we know, a lot of people come in um, to talk about different things. And to see a social worker or to see a therapist, because I also am a sex educator and sex therapist in training.
Mm-hmm.
So we started seeing more and more through me meeting with clients that fashion is coming up. Not even just fashion that you see every day, but kink fashion. Like some people wear it under their clothes because that's how they identify. That's who they want to be, but they're afraid to be that on the outside. So part of my job is getting them to be that person on the outside and getting, and how can I put it, erasing some of the stigma that they might have been told about, like kink fashion or what you can and cannot wear in life. Most recently, I just had someone that I was talking to about gender dysphoria and how it looks like for them walking into a store and wanting to get something to wear, but them not wanting their breasts to be so prominent in a shirt or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been really eye opening for me, because I didn't know that it was going to take off so fast. And also, like I said, most this is not a new concept. I think more psychologists do it. So more psychology interact with fashion and what to wear or why you're wearing it. I'm more concerned not about why you're wearing it or what you want to wear, but when you wear it, what do you feel like? Do you feel like
Mm-hmm.
yourself? Are you authentically yourself when you want to wear this? Because I think in the fashion world, they don't understand that a lot of different bodies have privilege. A lot of different bodies um, are victimized because of what they want to wear. And so when
Mm-hmm.
they're putting these lines out there, they are putting them out for a certain subset of people that may not get to enjoy that. And some of that is black and brown people. I talk a lot about. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, no, please go.
I talk a lot about the concept of the face mask and how everyone's wearing the face mask now, and how if you go into some black and brown communities, we're faced with signs that say no face mask, no hoodies, no this, and that's just another form of like prejudice and racism. But the fashion world doesn't see that. They it's okay for Gucci to put out a $300 face mask, but some communities can't wear it, and if they do wear it, we're going to be stopped, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so basically, like through fashion, we consider how some bodies are privileged, some bodies are abused, some bodies are prioritized, and how some are ignored. And that was a quote that somebody that I follow on Instagram put on, and it like really stuck with me. That concept that people don't often think about when you're looking at fashion or wearing fashion or interested in fashion.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about what you just said to me is that, the privilege of certain bodies to get away with certain things, right? Certain bodies can wear hoodies or can cover their heads, but certain people can't. And I'm wondering about, like, just because fashion is such a visible form of identity, it's in many ways the ways in which we present ourselves to the world before we even start to speak. Um, I'm curious about, like, how you, as on one side a fashionista and on the other side a social worker, kind of thread the needle between encouraging people to be self-expressed, right? And then
Hmm.
at the same time acknowledging that where they are self-expressed may not be a safe place to be so, right?
Yes.
And like transgender example is like a great one. Like you can certainly dress in the clothing that makes you feel the most you, but not every environment that you're going to pass through is going to be accepting or welcoming of that version of your presentation. So how do you navigate that when you're talking to people, especially youth, about like be yourself but also evaluate where you're going as yourself, right?
Right, and that's a really difficult conversation to have, and I think the only way that I express that to them sometimes is I put it back on me, right? Being a black queer woman, it's some things that I will want to wear, but if I walk into certain spaces, I'm not taken seriously. Even with all the titles behind my name, I'm not taken seriously. I'm still looked at, this black woman that comes in with all these tattoos or orange hair or whatever, however I want to express myself that day. Or if
Hmm.
I come in and um, I have on a suit and I say my pronouns and that I'm queer and someone's looking and someone that might not be as in tune with the community, and I get that a lot, is how are you queer and you have kids? It's just the ignorance. So
Right.
I talk to the kids about it, but also like you said, safety is important. So a lot of the kids and a lot of the adults that I talk to, they do have what we call safe clothes, right? So they
Hmm.
they come into. So I'm in Philadelphia, and I'm primarily work in and around the neighborhood, which is all LGBTQ friendly. So some of the teens may come into neighborhood and feel completely comfortable in neighborhood, but then when they leave out at the end of the day, they may ask to change before they go back in their neighborhood because
Sure.
it is a safety issue. And
Hmm.
I think I want that to be known because within our community, we know that, but outside of our community, people, they don't understand it. They think that, oh, that person, I know that they're gay, and I've seen them dressed like this before, but why are they dressed like this here? And they think that the person is not being authentic, but the person has to think about their safety. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of times they come up with the term code switching,
Hmm.
right? And how you act one way in one neighborhood and act another way in another neighborhood or at work, and you even see this concept, Allison, also at work, right? Because
Hmm.
some jobs, they don't accept you to come in as yourself. Like some bodies are not able to come in skirts, even though that's how they may feel that day,
Hmm.
and it's a really deeper issue, and I think one of our missions is to get that out there for people to understand that, again, fashion is not frivolous. Is It has so much more meaning behind it, and that could be um, the the for lack of a better word, life and death of someone coming in to see you. I speak to a lot of. I know you asked me earlier to also talk about how I integrate social work into it. A lot of social workers that I've worked with get upset when someone in the LGBTQ community misses a lot of appointments. And I've had people that I've supervised say, well, the person said they didn't come because they didn't have a wig today. And then
Mm.
they'll sit up there and say, well, that's stupid. Like, why wouldn't you come to an appointment if your light's about to get cut off, you need food, or you need HIV medications, or HIV prevention medications, but you're not coming out your house because of a wig. Well, a part of our job at Prevention Meets Fashion is going out and saying, well, that person wants to walk outside their door and feel like themselves. Just like you get up and you walk outside to come to work, they want to be able to feel the same way. So that wig to them is more than just hair on their head. That's them
Hmm.
stepping out and being those them authentic selves. And so I've been able to work with organizations to be able to include wigs and makeup and um, clothes into their budget so that we can be able to provide those necessities for people just like we provide toothpaste and deodorant and everything else, because it can get expensive, especially when you're if you're like a trans person or a non-binary person and you're transitioning, you know, it could be very
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah, it's actually funny because like just that struck me just at a personal level, just thinking about like the cost of femininity, right? Like
Hmm.
just like to for a person who's coded as feminine to walk out on the street, it's not as simple as just wearing, a skirt. It's often looking presentable, looking put together in a certain way, and that requires makeup, and that requires hair care, and that requires nail care, and all these things that are just so beyond what I think a lot of traditionally masculine people might think in
Hmm.
terms of just what it is to look like you belong somewhere. And the passing privilege, not just of people of not just LGBT people, but also just everybody, like the need to pass as what you want to be seen as, but also what society deems to be the normal markers of those
Hmm.
things.
Yes.
It's interesting because it makes me think of, I mean, the code switching, and you describing your experience in Philadelphia in the neighborhood, like a code switching obviously is a phrase we heard a lot, we hear a lot in terms of race,
Right.
um, and at the same time, it's something that comes up in LGBT communities too, and just what it makes me think of is the intersectional issues for particularly of queer people of color,
Hmm.
because it's not just code switching from straight to queer or from white dominated spaces to POC dominant spaces. It's all of those intersections at once. Um, so you're not necessarily just kind of going from one A to B, but often from A to B to C, and then how A and C interact. Like it
Hmm.
just so many more levels of complications,
Yes.
because of those intersecting identities.
Yes. Yes.
So you were talking kind of about how prevention meets fashion. You started with kind of condom normalization and condom kind of comfort, and then you started talking about intimate partner violence. So do you feel like you kind of have take on different themes with each one of your, I don't know, seasons or however you would describe it?
Yes, I do. So right now is annual. The fashion shows are annual, and each year is a new theme
Mm,
that we pick. And so yeah, we do find ourselves taking on different theme with whatever the hot topic was that year to bring awareness to the people who may not be paying attention to it as much.
mhm,
Um, so yeah, I mean it's been really good because right now, like I said, I only do it annually, but
mhm,
I just got approached to do more stuff in between my annual fashion shows to also be able to reach more people that may not be coming out to my fashion shows as well. And
mhm,
my hope is to get more of the fashion community involved. Right now, like I have a huge LGBTQ fashion following, so other people that are doing queer fashion, affirming fashions. But I really want to take this way bigger and like somehow break into the fashion industry because I do so and I make everything myself.
mhm,
Um, and so I'm constantly learning how to manipulate latex because it is
mhm.
definitely hard,
I can
especially,
imagine.
you know. And but yeah, I just have so much more dreams for this, and I'm hoping that I can secure some funding to really go further with this.
Yeah, so tell me about how, like, I mean, so like the practicalities of, so you do an annual fashion show. Is that like a fundraiser, or is that just kind of a like, how does that work? And then how do you work with other people in the community to collaborate if you do, and like, integrate other people who might be doing similar work? Like, can you tell me just about like the creation of those events?
Yeah, so right now I have a small, like, little creative team that we get together and we figure out like what obviously the theme is going to be. Where's the location going to be? I think about safety because again, my events is open to all. So we get into that, and then we start thinking about who we can collab with. So within the last 3 years, mainly the collaboration has been around um, Philly and New Jersey sexual health and reproductive health organizations that we collab with. So that way, when the fashion show is always the end, right? That's just to bring people in. But when they're there, I actually do a whole talk about whatever the theme is going to be. Like I said, this year the theme was consent and intimate partner violence. So I did a whole presentation on what that looks like in LGBTQ communities, but also what that looks like in cis communities. And then I have the vendors there. Like I said, is majority sexual and reproductive health people. And this year, I was so excited to actually have two streetwear brands there, but one couldn't make it, but the other one was there to actually talk about like the intersectionality of like money and intimate partner violence, and their clothing brand, which is Money Mindset Clothing, um, and and it gave the audience a chance to interact with different organizations that's doing similar work, but also that they can have takeaways as well for other organizations if they need resources or anything like that. So it is a longer process. I mean, I'll be honest, when I first started, I jumped right in like, you know what, I just need a venue and I need some condoms and let's go. And it was so stressful. I had, and my first and second shows was majority with teens. So what I did was I picked a different Philadelphia school, and I went in and I talked to teens, which was really difficult because in Philadelphia is minimum sex education. There's no comprehensive sex education here. The kids really don't have to have sex education beyond use a condom. This is gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis type of thing.
Mhm.
So I actually built relationships with some of the teachers, and the teachers allowed me to come into their individual classes. And majority of the students did actually go to trade schools in Philadelphia that actually had fashion programs. So I went in and I talked to them about what I was trying to do, but also I actually brought condoms with me in different textures and shapes and colors and flavors. And they were amazed because they're like, when people come out from, all they show us is one pack and be like, here, this is how you use it. And here I
Mhm.
am talking about it in a whole different light. And the year before last, our theme was, what does prevention mean to you? And a lot of the kids, believe it or not, had friends 16 and 17 that were already diagnosed with herpes, that was
Mhm.
already on their second kid. And they were just like, Miss Nhakia, if I knew this, maybe I wouldn't have had my second child, or maybe I wouldn't be sitting here with a diagnosis of herpes, or my girlfriend wouldn't have a diagnosis of herpes or had a diagnosis of chlamydia or whatever. And then I also teach them to not let that STD or STI be shameful to you, because whether we want to admit it or not, it is a part of sex, you know?
Mhm.
And don't let no one, because they can use that as a form as well of intimate partner violence, right? Like no one's going to want you, and then you have
Mhm.
body issues and self-esteem issues. So also letting them know that you can live with this, you can manage with this. And no one ever talked to these teens that way before. It was always such negativity, and so that opened my eyes up to when I do future fashion shows to like really want to educate the community more. And oftentimes I'm met with resistance. A lot of people don't want to hear education. They don't want to hear the truth. They just want to come for the fun stuff. But, I always let everybody know, when you hire me, you're going to get the fun stuff too, but you're definitely 85% of the time are going to get the education, because that's important.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like so often, and again, I think a lot of us take for granted, like we've been having the conversation about condoms since, the 80s because of HIV in America. And we forget that there are these young people coming up that haven't gotten the conversation. And of course, all of the rolling back of sex ed that we've been doing because
Mhm.
because we have this notion that ignorance is bliss. And then if we don't teach kids how to, protect themselves, then they won't have sex, which is insane and
Yeah.
not true. And it's just it's exhausting, but I think what's interesting is you talking about, like, because I mean, you're saying like you're going to get the truth and the fun stuff, but so often the truth is fun. And I think that's
Mhm.
so, like, when you're talking frankly about sex to young people who don't have anybody else in their life that they can talk to about this stuff, just the very nature of it, you are like oftentimes these kids do get more engaged. I mean, as a sex educator, I certainly
Yeah.
see that, where finally an adult is talking to them like they're real human beings, not that they're, children who need to be,
Mhm.
protected from life. It's funny. It's like, of all the things you just said, the one thing that really stuck with me was talking about the variety of condoms,
Mhm.
and like just you fashionizing them. Like, you obviously, I'm assuming you'd have to find like a lot of different colors and a lot of
Yes.
different shapes. And it's such a funny thing because as a sex educator, I'll often hear, young men say that they don't want to wear condoms because they're uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Um, and I can to a certain degree sympathize with that. But it's like, well, that one kind of condom you probably tried was uncomfortable, but like, do you have any idea how many different kinds there are? It's like saying that, I can't wear shirts because that one tank top I tried on didn't fit well. It's like, well,
Absolutely.
okay. But we have
Absolutely.
so many options, people.
Yeah.
And you
Right.
making them look fun, and even the goofy aspects of it, like, the ones that have the ribs and the ones that
Right.
have the bumps on them, and just seeing like, this is, you got more options, and this can actually be fun. This can actually be fun
Yeah.
to, make your penis look different ways based on the different things that you can put on it. Like, that's silly, but at the same time, like, that can encourage kids to carry them and have
Yeah.
them and play with them, so
Yeah.
that it's not freaky when the time comes to actually use one.
Mhm. And and that concept is easier for us because we are sex educators. But when you talking to the parents, the kids get it. They get it
Yeah.
after a while. But when you're talking to the parents, it's like, no, I don't want my kid around that. No, my kid don't need to be around that. And
Hmm.
I even had parents say, "Well, they got older brothers," and I said, "Excuse me, but do who taught them to put a condom on?" And then it
Right.
gets the parent to thinking, right? Well, their older brother, and then I say, "Well, who taught them to put a condom on?" And it's like it's a cycle, like, "Oh, well, I think an uncle did or a brother did," but then who taught them, right? So you
Right.
have this cycle of you think you putting on condoms correctly, but you may not be putting it on correctly because someone else learned from someone else and it might not have been someone that knew how to put a condom on correctly, you know.
Right.
And so you run that risk of that. So it's nothing wrong with your parents coming out with you and learning it as a family because ultimately that makes them want to come with you. I'm a sex positive family. My kids come to me about everything. I
Hmm.
was so blessed that when they did decide to have sex, and my oldest will be 21 in June, he came to me. My youngest son came to me, and now I have a 10-year-old daughter who, she's been involved in my fashion show since she was 8, and that was a whole controversy because people were like, "I'm not coming because you have an 8-year-old in your fashion show." But you know
Hmm.
what? I talked to her about it age appropriately.
Hmm.
Of course, she's a little more advanced because I've been doing this for over 10 years. You know,
Hmm.
and since she's been born, but over 20 years with my oldest kids, and so she's a little more advanced, so I can get away with talking to her about stuff that you may not want to talk to your kids about. But
Hmm.
ultimately, you still should be having a conversation, even if they just pick it up and get a feel for it and say, "What is this?" or "What is this material?" When my daughter first asked, I told her, I didn't go into the whole sex conversation. This is for sex. I just said it's another form of contraceptive. And at that time, we were learning about like birth control options and stuff like that because I was doing a talk. So I had multiple forms of birth control. And I said, this is another form of what we were looking at the other day. It's just another tool for your toolbox. And she went and ran somewhere and put water in it. But you know,
As we all have done at some point.
right, right. So it's just the fact that she did that. Whereas my nephew, he helps me unroll them every year to make my clothes, and he's not ready for that talk yet. Every year I try, and he's like, "Yeah, no. Can I just play with some when you're done?" So he's not there yet. So now whereas my daughter is more advanced, he is just into. I've talked to him about his body, and as he's growing, he's 8, and stuff like that. And I don't even touch that topic of what condoms are or isn't or whatever with him because he's not there yet. So I think once we learn to know where our kids' maturity is, then I think the conversations are easier ahead. And I don't hide anything from them. Like right now, I'm also trying to do like a play on like period fashion, right? Like let's
Mhm.
make period stuff fashionable, right? So that we're not hiding it because those of us that get cycles, you know, we've been taught to shame it. So
Mm-hmm.
I just did a brief video on my Instagram of me trying on period underwear and how I introduced it to my daughter. And again, it's another toolbox, you know, and just trying to make it more fashionable. So like here's another option because again, some communities are privy to that and others are not. So I had a lot of feedback about I didn't even know these existed and what styles do they come in. So I was able to tell them that hey, they come in thongs, they come in boy shorts, they come in high waisted, they come in all the way up to 3XL. So so it's no body shaming and no so it's body positivity with it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really interesting because I think I mean, especially particularly the menstrual product stuff. So often, young people will need menstrual products long before they're actually even interested in sex, and
Yes.
so, but it's certainly part of the sexual life cycle of a human being, and so to be able to talk about like normalizing those things, because I do think like the more comfortable you are talking about tampons or talking about pads, like you have to. It almost is like a weird gift that menstruators are given young. Is that what's like if we have the right adults in our life that teach us how to use these products, then it can give us a chance to get to know our bodies before we share them with other people, if we're lucky. And that's a really useful, I think, skill for like people to like, I know what my parts look like, I know what they feel like, I know how to protect myself, and I know how to keep myself like clean, and all these different things that do start young. These are lessons that do start very young for a lot of us, and I think that that's like it is necessary, because we have the opportunity now to talk about pregnancy to people as young as 8 or 9, because they start
Mhm.
menstruating, and this is an opportunity for parents to like catch their kids at the beginning of a long, hopefully lifelong journey around understanding their bodies.
Yes, yes. But I mean, I think what people also like about prevention meets fashion is again that I'm using fashion to do this, and it's a
Hmm.
new way that many few people do, and so they looking at fashion in a whole different light now. So they're being purposeful now when they're going to purchase things, and
Hmm.
prevention meets fashion is just not about sexual and reproductive health, but it's also about sustainable fashion, right? What are you putting on
Hmm.
your body? So the way that is where when I explain my logo to people, I said the way that my logo is was created was purposely to have a circle because reproductive health, excuse me, and sexual health is continuous. So that's what the circle is about. But also prevention can meet fashion, but it can also be separate in itself. And so the way that it was created was I love metaphors and I love again being purposeful. And so like tell some people like I may talk about fashion by itself, but I also may talk about prevention by itself. But then when it meets, you really get it, you know? And so I just love this and I just can't wait to see how I grow it and where it goes and partnering with more people and get more people involved in the mission of prevention meets fashion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious about like just you being in Philly, like the proximity to New York, which is obviously like the fashion capital of the United
Yes.
States. Like, are you trying to make inroads there in that way?
I am. I am. So hopefully, in this upcoming year, I'll be um, collabing with some people in New York. That is my goal to do that. It is a lot of queer designers in New York. And I would just love to do that. Also, again, bringing it into the universities and talking about it more, especially because I do it from a social work lens where, like I said, others do it from a psychology point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you tell? I mean, just because this is a point of curiosity for me, what's the in your mind? What's the functional difference between social work versus psychology in the way you just use those terms?
So psychology is about like your thinking, like why you wear something. Um and social work, especially because I'm a macro social worker, so I mainly deal with like in the community, the person in this environment. So I'm more so interested in how does this person interact with fashion in their environment, right?
Mm,
So again, like I said previously earlier on in the podcast of like um when you wear this and you go out, like, why do you feel you can't wear that? Or why do
mhm,
you wear that? Right? So how does it interacting with the people around you, and how does that make you feel versus how does it make you feel to put on that shirt, if that makes sense?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me. This is probably a very like this is a concept you probably work with all the time, and I sound very naive just saying it. But it's just interesting to think about how I think as a culture, I think people are getting more comfortable talking about psychological concepts, right? Like
Mhm.
we're easy. It's easy to tell people like oh you're I don't know even like going through withdrawal or you're not you're what's the word like anxiously attached or all these kinds of
Mhm.
buzzwords that we use because of psychological terms seeping into culture. But I think that like social work terminology still feels frightening to some people to even discuss like the systems in which people live, and
Mhm.
certain communities are more comfortable with it than others because it's just more present. um, but I like the idea of fashion being a tool for to actually stimulate conversations
Mhm.
amongst communities
Yeah.
of like saying like why don't I feel comfortable walking down this particular block in my clothes, and like
Mhm.
why do you feel like it's appropriate for you to talk to me the way that you are only based on the way I style my hair or the lipstick that I'm wearing.
Yep.
I think that's a really powerful tool for just kind of community growth.
Mhm. And it also, again, certain communities, you have to approach certain communities with creativity, right?
Mhm,
Because some communities, especially Black and Brown communities, a lot of our history is rooted in white supremacy and,
mhm,
discrimination and racism and slavery. And so the one thing that our culture, both Black and Brown cultures, have been able to hold on to is our fashion, is
mhm,
our style. And so I think by bringing that to communities, again, they're gonna hear fashion first, but not know that they're learning, and once they
mhm,
do, then they'll get it, and they
mhm,
and they often do get it. I again, when I remember when I first did a talk, people came to the talk because they was curious, about fashion, mental health, and sexual health, and how it intersected, so they came just on curiosity, but then once they stayed and heard the presentation, it was like more and more questions started coming out, especially around like um appropriation and all
mhm,
types of stuff that people wouldn't think about.
mhm.
And so it was really amazing. It was really amazing and eye opening that something that I started out as like a hobby with me wanting to
Mhm.
get off the ground and running, that now it is.
That's great. Yeah, I think that it's a really important conversation that I see a lot in the sex ed world that is happening. Certainly not as much as it should be, but talking about like white supremacy in sexual health
Mm,
information, it, because of the way certain things are coded and how certain microcultures see things differently. And I think that we have such a common thing, especially among white women, about talking about like empowerment and like sexual empowerment and how certain things empower you in certain ways, and we act as though that's just true across the board for all communities and all people. And I think it's really interesting and important to discuss and to give room to for other experts in the field to discuss. Actually, like maybe that specific kind of lipstick or that specific kind of fashion is empowering for you, but
mm,
a different kind of fashion will be empowering for a different person based on their own culture. And just giving room for that conversation to happen without assuming that everybody relates the same way to their sexuality and that that there's one version of sexuality that's the best kind. um, and I feel like it's so insidious because again with whiteness where it's just it's the water that we swim in, so it's invisible to us. And I think it's really nice to have just other people say, actually pause, let's rethink this, and let's rethink that the symbols that you're using, the metaphors that you're using, because not everybody relates to them in the same way.
mm-hmm. I totally agree. Totally agree. Hopefully, I get feedback and questions and stuff from your audience, because I
Yeah.
just love to talk about prevention meets fashion. And again, it is a concept that someone is infusing social work into it.
Hmm.
And I don't want people to get confused, though. It is brands out here that's actually called social work,
Hmm.
but it has nothing really to do with the actual profession of social work. They just call their clothing brand social work, and they do infuse social work and fashion. So if
Oh,
somebody was
interesting.
to look up social work and fashion, that brand would come up. Um,
Okay.
and I believe it's like a Chinese brand where they infuse Chinese culture with fashion,
Hmm.
and it's more like um I want to say, like a political stance. I believe. I don't want to misspeak about the fashion brand, but I believe is more of a from a political lens, which we
Okay.
do take those stances as well,
Hmm.
with Prevention Meets Fashion. But no, if someone has questions, I can be emailed at preventionmeetsfashion@gmail.com. My Instagram is at Prevention Meets Fashion. If you have neither, you could just Google my name and Linked Up comes up, Twitter comes up, whichever way you want to contact with me. I am totally open to that. Because again, my worlds are intersectional. They collide in so many ways.
Thank you so much for talking to me. I'm looking forward to seeing everything blow up in spectacular ways for you, and you know, having your fashions and Paris Fashion Week and all the wonderful things that I'm sure will happen in the future. Um, and yeah, for people listening who are curious, obviously go to the links and learn more about all the cool work that you're doing, because I think it's really exciting, and I'm so happy to have you as a colleague.
Yes, thank you so much, Allison, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's Artgasm. Thank you, as always, for joining and listening and reaching out on all the various social medias. I will be back next week with another Artgasm Quickie and in another 2 weeks with a full interview. In the meantime, please do all the trifecta of liking and sharing and subscribing. And if you're feeling truly nasty, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcast platforms. In the meantime, thank you so much. I appreciate you, and I will be back to talk to you again soon. Bye.